forward to the title slide for her talk, Conscious Hedonism and Basic Needs, a Thriving Life That Doesn't Cost the Earth. And the talk today is based around Orshi's book, Sustainable Hedonism, which is available from all good booksellers and is also, for those in the room, available here at a discounted price should anyone like to purchase a copy after the seminar. And there are flyers there as well if you want to take one of those. Orshi has had a distinguished career already in economics and social policy. She did her PhD here a certain number of years ago with John Hills, and she was then at the Hungarian Ministry of Finance, where she was the head of the Economic Research Division, and she also became Deputy Director of the European Centre for Social Welfare Policy and Research in Vienna. But not content with having shaped social policy in practice in those two roles and others, she felt that there was more that she wanted to say and took some time out in order to write the book. And that's what I think Orshi is going to talk to us about today. As if that wasn't enough, Orshi is also a certified coach, psychological counsellor and psychodrama director. And I think, as you'll see as she goes through her talk today, those kinds of perspectives also very much inform her approach. So over to you, Orshi.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here, and thanks for the organization and hosting Tanya and the help of Nora and Abigail for the online sharing, and for all of you who are here in the room. I'm kind of really so happy to be back, because it's not just like 20 years ago that I completed my PhD here, but it feels like, like a proper event where I can connect to the audience. I felt a bit uneasy about, kind of the book was out, but still it was all virtual. And now it just like feels so good to also define this new format of partly hybrid, or kind of partly online, partly in person, just experimenting how it goes and how we can all feel included. So actually, as a kind of very first thing, I would like to ask those of you who are online to kind of put in your chat where you are checking in from, just the city and the country, so that, just to show where you are now. And to, as a kind of parallel to this, maybe in the room, just kind of the names and the institutions, if you could say, starting here.
Thanks. Very quickly. My name is Gabriela, and I'm a PhD student of the anthropology department here.
PhD Stewart, Case LSE.
I'm Guy Shannon, Guy Shannon Associates.
I'm Frampson. I'm a visiting researcher at the Mannheim Centre for Crime and Criminology at the LSE.
Ian Gough, visiting professor here at Case.
I'm Charlotte. I'm a master's student in the Department of Government, but I'm working as a research assistant at Ian here in Case.
Bob Costanza, I'm from the Institute for Global Prosperity at UCL.
I work for the company called Harting, the Japanese media company.
Robin Brown, Just Space, a network of grassroots organisations in London.
Thank you. And I realise I should have introduced myself when I introduced Orshi and failed to do so. I'm Tanya Burkhart, and I'm an Associate Director here at the Centre for Analysis of Social Exclusion.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. And maybe before I start I just would like to kind of, maybe just think about everyone to invite for a personal exploration or kind of thought, kind of what is conscious hedonism for you? If you think back, for example, your day yesterday, what comes to your mind as an experience of conscious hedonism? You don't have to share it with anybody, just kind of think about it and maybe just kind of observe the kind of sensations you have when you think about this experience. I'm kind of doing it partly because I just wish to give kind of the intellectual impulse, but kind of my best hope of this talk and this whole topic is that actually it will be kind of a kind of an embodied or a kind of personal side as well. So it could inspire you kind of on a personal level, kind of, and that kind of with your whole whole body and whole being, not just kind of on an intellectual level. Yeah, and the book, the title of the book is actually Sustainable Hedonism, which may sound like a provocation, but I think that was kind of my deliberate intention to bit kind of shake up kind of what we think as a kind of stories of success and progress in life, and also kind of how we think about pleasure seeking. So I just meant to puzzle in a sense, to raise interest as well. And the book came out last year, kind of last May, just kind of a year ago, by Bristol University Press, and the kind of, I'm really also pleased to be here because it was kind of I'm very thankful to John Hills, my former supervisor, who was very encouraging to me in the publication and completion of this project, and I'm kind of really sad we cannot celebrate together it anymore, but I really want to honor him in this at this place. And what is also kind of the special, kind of to me, a very exciting moment that the Hungarian version has just come out this week. So it's actually was a kind of surprising thing, but I'm really pleased it did happen. Yeah, and what made me write this book? My personal motivation was that I have been working in the policy world, and I just many times I felt kind of constrained by, I don't know, the grant giving bodies or the policymakers' agendas. And I thought I really need to give myself a freedom at one point of my life. What would I write about if I was free? Kind of what makes sense for me? And also kind of, I just had also the feeling is that as a scientist, many times, I wasn't sure I'm really contributing to a meaningful dialogue or a change. It's just, and I was also wanted to explore what is it to become more like a storyteller as a scientist. How can I share a message with the general public? And then the kind of, and maybe kind of a very deep personal motivation, how can I weave together? I have many different interests, also academically, but also personally, partly this kind of on a collective level, working on social transformation, but on a personal level, kind of, looking at personal transformation as a group facilitator and coach. And for a long time, they were like fragmented, these pieces. And I just thought it's the time to integrate and weave them together. And let's see what happens, or kind of how they can mutually enrich each other. And on a kind of professional level, I kind of had this kind of puzzle that it was obvious from the scientific evidence that happiness is something good, in the sense that it's a good thing. Who wouldn't want to be happy? As a state of being, it's positive. And it has also kind of a causal relationship to many desirable outcomes like physical health, longevity, workplace productivity, and also pro-social and pro-ecological behavior. So happy people are more likely to work well, to live well, to take better care of themselves and of others and the world in general. But on the other hand, the quest for happiness often fails. So we know that there are kind of phenomena of addiction, for example, or overconsumption on a global level, and also there's a lot of suffering. Even though we seem to kind of want happiness, it's not happening. Mental health issues are also a strong agenda here in case. So kind of what can I? So this was the puzzle I was thinking about, and kind of what I think is probably a step forward is to redefine our understanding of happiness, which could be like flourishing life, as I'm proposing, and also kind of refine our strategies for seeking pleasure. This could be sustainable hedonism. So, what is the challenge and the context we are having now? This ecological and social challenge we have is the kind of most recent IPCC, the International Panel for Climate Change report, says about over 3 billion people living in contexts that are highly vulnerable to climate change. And we don't have now a global climate resilient development. So somehow there is just the path is not what we are following now at the moment. And essentially humanity, despite all the progress we had so many kind of, really so many achievements as a civilization, but something kind of fundamental is missing. We don't live in a socially just and environmentally safe space. So kind of to explain this, there is no single country where the basic social safety is achieved, and at the same time, the use of resources remains under the ecological ceiling, if we take into account the activities which are outsourced to other countries. And just to show it on a visual scale, visual graph, it's from the Global Sustainable Development Report 2018. So it's kind of on a horizontal axis. This is the biophysical boundaries transgressed. So the higher number shows the higher number of boundaries transgressed, and on the vertical axis is the social threshold achieved. So it's based on the social development goals, and as you see, kind of the UK is kind of there. And what is kind of sad is that we would wish to see countries in the upper left corner with kind of achieving the social objectives and not transgressing the planetary ones. And currently there is no country there. Another illustration is kind of probably well known, maybe some of you know it very well, is the donut concept, which is kind of actually conceptually the same issue as the kind of basic social foundation as a kind of bottom floor, and the outer is the ecological ceiling. And what we want is a safe and just space for humanity in between these two. This is the objective we are for. And for this, we need a fair consumption space, and we want to get to this fair consumption space in a kind of ideally in a planned transition instead of a chaotic one, because that's much more costly to us all. And this fair consumption space is not just a kind of mild, nice to have thing, like, I don't know, like a cherry on the top of a cake, but it's like really a profound, deep transformation, because as a kind of a recent report says that we need actually the reduction of the ecological footprint by 95% by 2050 in high-income countries like Britain. And also there is like much reduction needed in countries which are less well off. So we really need a degrowth in the global north, and we need a green growth in the global south. Because there will be, this reduction is very essential, because there will be actually countries which would need to consume more actually. So this fair consumption means to raise up those who are kind of under consuming, who need to reach the kind of social minima as a floor, and we need to reduce consumption for all those who are kind of consuming on an environmentally unsustainable level. And there's a kind of recent, not so recent, 2018 article in Nature Sustainability. Dan O'Neill and colleagues state that kind of there is enough resources for physical needs. So physical needs such as nutrition, sanitation, access to electricity, and the elimination of extreme poverty could likely be met for all people without transgressing planetary boundaries. However, the universal achievement of more qualitative goals, for example, high life satisfaction, will require a level of resource use that is 2.26 times the sustainable level, based on current relationships. This is my emphasis, the current relationships. So kind of, so what follows is that I think we need to question and revise these current relationships between the resource use and the level of satisfaction. So we need to reconsider our strategies for a happy life. We can't say people, you can't be happy, or you have no right to have a high life satisfaction. That would be a bit kind of much to ask. But if you say that kind of, maybe there is this kind of current link between resource use and life satisfaction can be somehow readjusted. That could be a pathway to this fair consumption space. And of course, I mean, as an economist, I very much question our current notions of progress and human nature, largely kind of stemming from these assumptions of human nature of economic man, selfish, competitive, fully rational, but also the pleasure seeking is very much there as well. And what is interesting about it, I mean, it has a vast literature. I'm not going into criticizing the assumptions of economic man, but what is kind of really fascinating from our point of view here is that it works as actually a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if we believe that this is the human nature, then we are likely to kind of take up these norms or become ourselves like this. There's a couple of studies showing that it happens among economy students. And also there is like an impact on the mainstream culture. So there is like, so kind of in a sense, this unrestrained hedonist pleasure-seeking becomes part of the mainstream culture as well. And the other issue is that, which comes from economics, is that preferences are given. So there is this invisible black box, which is, I think it's done in the name of freedom. Let's respect the choice and freedom of people, but also kind of there is very little reflection on real preferences, as said by Horshiny, a Nobel laureate economist. We often don't know what is the best for us, actually, what is our real interest. And there is ever more evidence in behavior economics as well, that we just may not know and we may not do what is best for us. So kind of respecting all this may be kind of questionable. And the other issue is like economics is really a value-free descriptive science. I believe that we need much more reflection on how personal values drive professional choices within economics and outside economics everywhere. So yeah, science may not be as descriptive and value-free as we hope. And economics is also kind of a moral science, as for example, Tony Atkinson being in this building and many others kind of spoke about earlier. So I think we need to revise our recipes for a good life in our families and communities as well. What are the stories we are telling ourselves about a life worth living? So I think we are all storytellers of the world, each of us, and through our stories we create our world. And we are often hardly aware of the origins of these stories or our potential to transform them. So what is the kind of hedonism in the 21st century, which I might kind of say that it's a misconception of hedonism as such. Radical hedonism, this term comes from Erich Fromm. Some people said this radical may be not ideal as an adjective. Anyway, I'm just using his term. He kind of talks about that in this kind of notion of hedonism, the ultimate aim of life is the maximum pleasure and the fulfillment of any desire a person may feel. And this is actually seemed to be the kind of very simplified 21st century notion of hedonism. We may reflect, we may see, and in the consumer society, the kind of where desires are even inflated, and there is this encouragement of unrestrained satisfaction by consumption. So it's really an egoist pleasure seeking, where there is little consideration how my action affects others, or how, yeah, it's really about my own pleasure, maximizing my own pleasure, whatever it takes. And it's also kind of making objectifying the other person or anything. It's just, they are useful if they serve my pleasure and not useful if they don't. So it creates a kind of very self-centered universe. And this notion of radical hedonism also implicitly holds that momentary desire equals real need. But on the other hand, it's also kind of within us, in our culture, this knowledge and warning that greed is cursed or not ideal. And I'll just kind of bring some examples from art and literature. This is the grim tale on the fisherman and his wife, where the fish where the fisherman catches a fish who is kind of fulfilling his wishes, and kind of starting, I mean, I don't want to tell the whole story, but it's a story on greediness, and ultimately kind of they just, the ever greater wishes just kind of, they just at the end kind of end up where they started from. So kind of, it's never a state of satiation, of celebration of what the fish is granting, it's never enough. And then it's kind of Dante Alighieri's is Inferno and Hell, where, for example, the slaves of money are in the fourth realm of hell, for example, throwing kind of, it's like a bit like Sisyphus' efforts, always kind of engaged in this activity without end. And then a kind of a recent example is the Grand Gough. It's where four friends withdraw into the countryside and to just give way to their kind of desires. They eat as much as they want. They invite prostitutes, but at the end they all die. So it's like not a very. It's actually, yeah. It's many people say it's a critically fantastic film, but disgusting. So I think the ultimate question is what we are concerned about is that how can we enjoy life on the one hand, but be responsible on the other hand. And this kind of reminds me of Freud's conflicts of the id and the superego, where id is our instinctive part, kind of unrestrained pleasure seeker, we may say, and the superego, which is the kind of construct, which is the responsible kind of adhering to social expectations and norms. And the ego in between is the one which is mediating, and the healthy ego which manages to negotiate well or bring these desires together. And if it doesn't really happen well, then comes neurosis and suppression and all kind of negative symptoms. So this is actually a task we are all, each of us is kind of doing constantly in our lives, and it's a kind of constant seeking of a balance in each life situation. How much should I go one way, another way? So kind of, responding to the impulses of the world. So it's not a static state, but rather a dynamic one. And and the question, kind of seeing all the challenges of overconsumption is like, kind of, but why would anyone opt for minimalism in the world of maximizer? And kind of why would we, and ecologically responsible behavior is often perceived as a loss of happiness and life quality, evoking resistance or even anger. So what I'm kind of presenting here and offering here as an alternative, or as a kind of more inviting concept. So rather than kind of what we have to deny of ourselves, kind of what are we invited to? And this would be the flourishing life, which is not new at all. It's as I will explain later. And just to kind of first draw a map of happiness, so kind of different approaches to happiness, or subjective well-being, as a scientific term calls it. I think many of you are familiar with this, so I'm not going to go into great depth, but this is my kind of very simplistic kind of overview chart. And so we can kind of focus on the body, on emotions, and on the mind when we think about happiness. And what was interesting to me is actually to see that there is very little focus on the physical pleasure in the literature. So I found actually kind of a 2015 article by by Biswas Diener and others on pleasure and initial exploration. So that's kind of quite interesting. And maybe just to mention that in happiness economics, or I can call it happiness economics, the kind of main measure is the self-reported life satisfaction and self-reported happiness, which are both cognitive measures and used as proxies for utility. So so economists tend to believe that using measures of happiness or subjective well-being can be used as measures of utility in research. And kind of there is also kind of of course, many more than the quantifiable happiness measures. So, for example, positive psychology, some people call for the more kind of humanistic portraitures of happiness. And also there is like the whole literature in philosophy, religion, art. So happiness is not just happiness research, but part of our whole partly and where this flourishing life comes from is Aristotle, partly from the Nicomachean Ethics, written by him. And why it is fascinating for me, and I believe could be a kind of an inspiring concept for us now, is that according to him, happiness is the activity of the soul. So it means that it's based on conscious choice and action. It's not just like a fate or a gift of God, but it's like something we can consciously act for. And the way to act for it is the persistent practice of virtues, or sometimes it's translated as excellence, and in the context of community and friendship. So it's not just about my own happiness, but it's like how I contribute to the happiness of others. So happiness is not just simply what we feel, but also what we do and how we live. And Aristotle has a renaissance in a couple of years. It has flourishing, has an extended literature in modern psychology as well. And actually, just to kind of go back to the conceptual bit, flourishing life is one of the translations of eudaimonia, the original term used by Aristotle, where eudaimonia refers to kind of a good spirit. Eud is good, and daimon is a spirit, and spirits were the movers, or daimons were the spirits, the movers who move the planets in the cosmos. And there was this perfect order in the cosmos, according to the ancient Greek belief. And the task of human life was to create this perfect order in oneself. So just to kind of mirror this outer perfection inside. And so I would say, this is my kind of paraphrasing, is that eudaimonia is to become a good spirit and living in harmony with other beings and the whole cosmos, actually. And flourishing life is one translation of eudaimonia. Sometimes it's translated as happiness, but I prefer flourishing life because it's kind of, it makes it clear that it's not just a sensation, but it's different. And it's just like showing. I'm not sure I would go through this whole. So it is kind of one kind of. I really like this flourishing scale by Ed Diener and Robert Biswas Diener, just exploring dimensions of well-being, including meaningful life, but also kind of social connection. And I'll explain why it is relevant, because this is kind of one of the theories which I really find very relevant for understanding flourishing life is the self-determination theory in modern psychology. And what it states is that there are three core basic psychological needs we all have as humans, all of us, and they are autonomy, competence, and belonging. And we all have these needs, although there are cultural variations and individual variations. But the task of human life is to actually meet all of them, and to find the kind of right way of ensuring that they are met. So in a sense, we can say that autonomy is the right way of becoming free as an individual. It's not, it doesn't mean the kind of egoistic individualism. It's something else. It's maybe more kind of aligned to agency, or kind of taking choices for my own interest, aligned to my own deepest values. And belonging is kind of the community to kind of, to love others, respect others, but also be loved and respected by others. And as you see, kind of for a flourishing life, we need both. It's not just individual freedom, not just autonomy, but also kind of, how we are in our relationships. And competence is like that we feel that we can create something, we can contribute to the world, we have something to add. We are kind of awakened to our power as creators, co-creators in this world. So we need kind of all three of this to live a good life. And actually, these are the three dimensions also reflected in the flourishing scale I showed in the earlier slide. And flourishing life is a good thing in itself, but it also has a kind of very good impact on in other dimensions of well-being, such as physical health, and it makes, and it kind of creates, it has a causal impact on collaborative and ecologically aware behavior. So I'm arguing that it can inspire voluntary simplicity, environmental and pro-social action. So it is a philosophy of a good life, where a good life is a life which is not harmful to oneself, to others, or to the whole world. And how to cultivate this kind of flourishing life? The main elements I'm emphasizing is to become better hedonists, to cultivate virtues, and the tool is experiential learning for this. How to become better hedonist? You may also have maybe your own ideas in your own life, how you want to become a better hedonist. Just to kind of give you some inspiration for this, one kind of classical inspiration comes from Epicure, who was the kind of master hedonist and the forefather of hedonism in ancient Greece. What kind of his notion is that happiest life is free from fear and need, and the path to be free from need is also the domination of what he calls vain and empty desires. So he discouraged people from visiting the fairs because they may want to long for things they don't really need. This is what he was saying. And also just to kind of avoid wasteful, luxurious demands, because that might be difficult to satisfy later. And he was kind of asked by this, is not such a life boring? So, it may be boring for some, those who are spoiled by the desires, but if you are really a kind of a hedonist, then it's not going to be boring, but it will ultimately lead to tranquility, a kind of a deep state of a kind of peaceful state, and it's a state of independence from the desire. So it's a kind of inner freedom, I would say. And what was important for him is that he claimed it's not achievable alone. A community is not much needed, so created the garden, which was actually quite revolutionary in those terms, because it included also, as far as I know, women and people from different social classes. Probably slaves not. That was a bit of a shadow side of the ancient people. And Aristotle talks about hedonism as well, even though he thinks that pleasure is not the ultimate value in human life, but he talks about the right attitude to seeking pleasure. And what he's talking about is it's a matter of habit, actually, how to seek and enjoy pleasure. And in this, it's very important to achieve a state of self, or not a state, it's like quality of self-mastery, which is a midway between painful asceticism and self-indulgence or indulgence. So it's also kind of a path to seek for this middle way, and the practice. And he differentiated between necessary and optional things. And just to give an example, he mentioned as the necessary things the physical needs, and the optional one is victory, wealth, and honor. So in Aristotelian terms, money is not something bad as per se, but it depends on how one uses it. It's actually even a kind of a tool which enables one's kind of to live a good life. But this is one of the optional, what he calls optional. And I would say this is kind of my idea, that I think to become better hedonist is that we need to be more aware of these psychological needs I described in the self-determination theory, and also of our body and physical needs. So it's ultimately about inner freedom in this notion of conscious hedonism. And now I get to the basic needs. Just kind of, if we want to, we need to also attend to the basic physical needs or non-physical needs we have, and according to theorists of basic needs, there are a finite number of basic human needs, and they are universal. And what is kind of a good news for us is that they are satiable. And Max-Neef mentions affection, participation, idleness, creation, identity, and freedom as basic human needs. Doyle and Landoyle and Young Gough, I'm not sure if I pronounce Gough. They talk about physical health and personal autonomy, and they call for satisfy these needs for as many people as possible to the highest sustainable level. And if these basic needs are finite, then sustainable development is possible. So we can live a good life for all of us without damaging our natural ecosystems. So in this notion, I would say that needs differ from wants, and the focus is on needs rather than being enslaved to wants. But of course, I mean, I'm kind of really maybe brushing through a bit, because there is, like, of course, this objective and subjective dimension, how much it is the kind of the objective quality of meeting some basic needs, and the subjective dimension of want is that, yeah, meeting the aspirations. But I cannot go into this now, but maybe in the exchange and Jan can also probably add his ideas on this. I think I skipped this slide, or just kind of very shortly, is that there is now evidence, mostly on correlation, but some causal studies actually reducing consumption and switching to more green behavior, so to speak, does not reduce to well-being, but even increases it. Activities in the solidarity economy, for example. What do I mean by cultivating virtues? Yeah, Aristotle talks about two main forms of virtues, the intellectual one and the moral ones. And what is interesting in his notion of intellectual virtues is that it's not just intellectual, it's also kind of, yeah, he says based on science, but also on practical wisdom. And this practical wisdom means that knowing, it's the knowledge of what is good for oneself and what is good for others. So it really has this element of wisdom, but it can be acquired through teaching and learning, of course. And in contrast, the moral virtues are the ones which are kind of really need practice, and we all have to engage kind of in kind of master them. He mentions courage, temperance, liberality, munificence, pride, long temper, good temper, wittiness, friendliness, and truthfulness. Anyway, I think we can, to me, it's much more like a framework or an invitation to think about our conscious ability, our agency, one may say, to kind of how can we, cultivate the excellence and the skill which makes us to live a full life and a good life, meeting our basic needs and also kind of the needs to be kind of live a satisfied life. So to me, these kind of virtues are an inspiration, but I think we can also kind of find our own current virtues in our current societies, what is really helpful for us. So I made a little bit of thought experiment in the book, just kind of, but probably I'm not going
About
to.
5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Then I just kind of mentioned, this is a kind of a growing pillar in my life, this experiential learning, as I call it, which could be, I believe, a laboratory for flourishing life. And I think the need for this, and also I believe that for the solution of our problems, we need to move beyond intellectual understanding. I'm not denying the importance of intellectual understanding. I just believe that it's part of a bigger puzzle. And it's, in the kind of current phenomenologist philosophy, or the 20th century phenomenalist philosophy, for example, there is a call for the rediscovery of the world. Moving beyond the intellect, and we know also from Sigmund Freud, Carl Gustav Jung, there is kind of really this potential. There is this kind of vast unconscious, personal and collective, which drives our actions. So if we want to kind of transform our world, we need somehow to connect to this invisible terrain in ourselves. And also kind of there is this literature and the whole field, the motivational theories as well, and alternative pedagogies inspired by David Kolb, experiential learning, where active experimentation is a part of the learning cycle. And I believe that our culture also has a potential for not a potential, but it's with us actually for ages, to kind of this playful exploration in storytelling, in play, in theater, in various ways, and it's actually this kind of tradition of theater and dramatic action came back with Jacob Levi Moreno in psychodrama, but also kind of in drama therapy, playback theater, or now in kind of also promoting collective transformation. In Brazil by Augusto Boal, the theater of the oppressed, or Otto Scharmer, who is now very popular with his social presencing theater, kind of creating the world we want to see and living it and experimenting it, and also kind of looking at the hindrances of making it happen. And in this kind of playful and embodied exploration, some of this invisible can become visible or sensible, or I can sense it in a sense, and there is this kind of really fascinating link between the kind of personal transformation and the collective one. All these kind of theories of drama and psychotherapy kind of believe that if we change ourselves, we can change the whole culture. But on the other hand, I really want to add that I think if we change the culture, it can also kind of help individuals to change themselves. And this is where the kind of social policies step in. I just want to emphasize one bit, the sense of safety. There is probably a lot more one could say how social policies could support flourishing life, but just as a kind of key element is that there is quite a bit of research evidence showing that a physical safety and emotional safety is key for non-materialist life strategies, or kind of self-transcendence. So people who had an experience of insecurity in their early lives are very likely to want to create it by all means, and what they probably think they can do the best is to do it in material terms, like kind of earning as much as they can, but also kind of in a material in a broader sense, like extrinsic motivation, like seek reputation and approval from the outside. And it may be even kind of it's a suboptimal strategy because it means detachment from their own sometimes deepest values, and it's a suboptimal strategy socially as well, because it kind of largely contributes to the phenomenon of overconsumption. So I believe that kind of if a well-functioning welfare system wants to support pro-social and pro-environmental behavior, then it's a good idea to provide a safety net, kind of look after kind of basic physical needs, but also kind of in a broader sense to kind of give a chance for everyone to thrive, supporting the human capabilities, the ability to choose a good life in a broader sense of talking about a multi-sense framework. And psychology kind of has put a special emphasis on early life years and care and the early family environment. So this kind of implies that it's very vital to support mother and parents actually even before the birth of the child. It's a very fragile period of life. And we also need a school system that ensures emotional safety and well-being, and of course, kind of mental health support. And just to conclude, just to sum up shortly, so I was arguing that flourishing life can be a normative framework for a good life that doesn't harm oneself, others, or the earth. And it's based on community, solidarity, a persistent practice of virtues. And happiness is not simply a momentary feeling, but based on action. Having said this, it can be a feeling as well, so I'm not excluding that. And Aristotle actually says that the kind of ultimate result of all this action will be that happiness will arrive. So it's no one is expecting us to give up the idea of happiness ultimately. And we need to reinvent pleasure seeking. So it's a kind of much more conscious approach to hedonism can help, which is based on self-mastery and the critical assessment of our desires. Or another way, kind of, we can say that to really tap into our real preferences, our real needs and our real desires, and to maybe kind of clear it from some of the kind of cultural impacts and cultural norms. And this is a normative approach to personal and collective thriving, and it can be supported by adequate public policies. So this was the main point, and finally some reference to the book. I was kind of rushing through many things, but a lot more is in the book actually. And Bristol University Press is so generous for a discount for participants of this event with the use of this code. if you order it kind of today and tomorrow, I believe. And very much thank you for your attention, and looking forward to the discussion.